The knock at the door came soft, like a whisper, as Frank's hand settled on my waist, warm, possessive, pulling me into something I hadn't seen coming. The air in our Boston apartment thickened, heavy with something new, something that made my skin burn before I knew why. I held my breath, standing close, waiting for what came next, heart pounding like a warning I couldn't heed. If you want more, like and subscribe, it helps. If you're new here, welcome. You've landed in a raw one. Glad you're here. Let's dive in. Frank's arms tightened around my waist as I leaned closer. The room silent around us, a silence that felt like it could swallow us whole. The sheets were still warm under me, his breath soft against my skin, a rhythm that stirred something dangerous inside. My palms pressed against his chest, holding me steady. But the quiet between us was heavier, laced with something unspoken. I leaned down, my forehead touching his, and he met me with a kiss light, familiar, but carrying a weight that made my pulse race. His hand slid along my sides, pausing at my waist, fingers lingering like they knew something I didn't. I smiled faintly, thinking this was just another night with the man who knew me better than anyone, the man who owned me in ways I never admitted. Then he said, "You don't have to let tonight end here." I froze, not completely, but enough for him to feel it, enough for the air to turn sharp, electric. His eyes opened, calm, serious, locking onto mine, piercing through every defense I had. I held my breath. "What do you mean?" I whispered, barely audible, my voice trembling with a question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Right then, a sound from the hallway broke the silence. A knock, soft, slow, like whoever was there knew I wasn't ready. My chest tightened, each second stretching tight. Frank didn't look away, his gaze holding me captive, daring me to move. I asked him to wait until you were ready, he said. My hand stayed on his chest, close, but something in me shifted, teetering on an edge I couldn't see. He stood, moving slow, his face calm, careful, like a man walking toward a fire he started. I stayed on the bed, sheets crumpled around me, the room still warm, still heavy with the heat of what we'd started. He walked to the door, still in the clothes he'd worn earlier, every step deliberate, like he was pulling me along without touching me. The knock didn't come again, but someone was still there, waiting. Then the door opened. Light spilled across the rug, soft, amber, like a spotlight on a stage I didn't know I was on. I saw him before I really looked. Nick, the man from dinner, the one whose laugh I could pick out in a crowd, whose eyes had lingered on me too long over the wine. Dark button-up, sleeves rolled, one hand in his pocket, the other holding something I couldn't make out, something that didn't matter because his eyes were on me, steady, unreadable, pulling me in. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and hot all at once, like a warning I ignored. Frank opened the door wider, stepping aside to let him in, a gesture that felt like handing me over. Then he turned, sat beside me, silent, calm. But his calm was a lie, and I knew it. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded faintly, still unsure, still caught in the pull of his voice and Nick's stare. He leaned forward, speaking low. "We can wait if you need." Nick stepped closer, his steps even, sitting across from me, his eyes steady, focused, like he saw every thought I was trying to hide. Frank took my hand gently, his touch grounding me, tethering me to a moment I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. The room went quiet, the silence sharpening everything, making every breath feel like a confession. Nick reached out, taking my other hand for a moment, his touch light but burning, a promise I didn't ask for. I stayed still, my hands on my lap, heart racing like it wanted to break free. Frank looked at me, his voice soft. "Only if it feels right," he said. I nodded, a nod that felt like stepping off a cliff. My hand was still warm from Nick's touch, the room's heat clinging to my skin, a heat that wasn't just from the air. I didn't speak. Frank's hand rested near my shoulder, lingering, a steady weight that kept me from falling apart. Nick shifted in his chair, his movements calm, deliberate, each one pulling me closer to something I couldn't name. The mood shifted, thick with something dangerous, something I wanted to taste. Nick moved closer, his leg brushing mine as he sat beside me, close enough to feel the heat of him, to know what it meant. Frank kissed near my shoulder, soft, then adjusted the fabric at my side, his fingers tracing a line that felt like a dare. The moment stayed calm, but it was a calm before a storm, and I was the storm. I didn't move, caught in the weight of their nearness, their want. A cool breeze from the room brushed over me, but the warmth beneath held fast, a warmth that came from them, from me, from what we were doing. I felt unsteady under the silence's weight, like I was balancing on a knife's edge. Nick adjusted his position, silent, his silence louder than words, heavy with intent. Frank kissed my cheek, soft, calm, but his lips burned, marking me. I stared ahead, focused on the quiet, focused on not falling into the abyss they'd opened. Nothing could pull me away. The room grew heavier, the silence a weight I couldn't shake. I sat up straighter, aware of how close they were, their presence a cage I didn't want to leave. No one spoke. The silence stretched, thick, alive, pulling me under. Frank's hand steadied me as I leaned back, then he moved closer, whispering, his voice a thread tying me to him. To this. Nick shifted in his chair, adjusting to the quiet, his eyes never leaving me, reading every pause, every breath. Frank stayed beside me, his presence soft, steady, but steady like a predator waiting to strike. I shifted slightly, trying to hold my ground in a moment that was slipping away. Everything was still, but still like the moment before a crash. Nick moved closer, and I adjusted to stay centered, to keep from falling into him. I exhaled softly, a breath that carried more than I meant it to. His breath was close, calm, steady, his presence near enough to feel, near enough to make my skin hum. A slight movement nearby startled me, my breath catching before I could stop it. Frank's hand rested at the nape of my neck, his thumb grazing my jaw as he kissed me, pausing, like he knew I was caught in something I wasn't ready for. Nick shifted, careful not to break the silence, his focus deliberate, his eyes seeing too much. He stayed close, his presence clear, his hand smoothing the fabric beside me, a gesture that felt like a claim. A soft movement caught my eye, a movement that pulled me in, held me fast. His hand lingered near me, a quiet anchor as I held my place, an anchor I didn't know I needed. I reached for the sheet instinctively, unsure if I was pulling it closer or holding myself steady, unsure if I wanted to stay or run. Frank whispered something into my neck, too soft to catch, just the warmth of his voice as he kissed the top of my shoulder. Each kiss a step deeper into the dark, the moment stretched, quiet, heavy with what we weren't saying. They were close, their focus steady, unwavering. A hand moved along the edge of my dress, thoughtful, slow, a touch that made my heart stutter. Nick moved slower now, his movements matching the quiet focus, his breath close enough to deepen the silence, close enough to make me forget myself. I turned my head, my lips meeting Frank's again as he kissed just below my shoulder, lingering, each kiss a chain I didn't want to break. My breath stopped as his lips grazed my shoulder, a moment that felt like sin made real. Frank pulled back, just enough to see my face, his hand still cupping my cheek. "Keep going," he said softly, calm, certain, his voice a command I couldn't refuse. I couldn't answer, not with words. I leaned in, guided by the silent understanding between them, by the tension coiling around me like a snake. They moved with a quiet awareness of each other. Frank kissed the top of my shoulder while Nick settled back, this time with purpose. His eyes locked on mine, steady, sure, wanting. My breath quickened as I sat up, my heart racing, pounding with the weight of what we were doing. A hand moved along the edge of my dress, calm, deliberate, while another adjusted a cushion nearby, and I shifted instinctively, caught in their rhythm, in their want. Frank's lips moved from my neck to my mouth, his kiss steady, silent, but heavy with what we weren't saying. I stopped thinking ahead. I was there, fully aware, fully alive in a moment that burned. I felt suspended, surrounded by silence and their steady focus, a focus that felt like worship and damnation all at once. Nick moved closer, one arm steady beside me as he gave me space, but not enough to forget him. I barely registered the shift before they moved around me, present, steady, watchful, their presence a web I couldn't escape. My legs adjusted as I settled, both of them close enough to feel their heat, their need. I was surrounded by a softer focus, careful, deliberate, a focus that held me like a lover's arms. Frank stayed behind me, steady, silent, his breath close, soft, even, his presence a constant pull. Nick moved closer in front, his hand still near me, calm, steady, his eyes reading every pause, every breath, like he knew me better than I knew myself. He leaned forward, the space between us narrowing with calm intent, not just closeness, but a presence that kept me grounded, kept me wanting. I exhaled sharply, the moment heavier than I expected, heavy with a truth I couldn't deny. Frank kissed my cheek, whispering words I couldn't catch, his hands steady on my sides, adjusting as I moved, holding me, surrounding me, keeping me from falling apart. It started slow, careful, quiet, giving me time to settle. But settling was the last thing I wanted. I gripped Frank's forearm for support as Nick moved with quiet awareness, adjusting as I steadied, his movements a mirror to my need. Their presence stayed silent, like they knew exactly what I craved, what I feared. I tracked every shift, every shared moment of focus. My hands found Frank's shoulders, holding tight to stay steady, to stay in the moment that was consuming me. I leaned into him, his voice low, steady in my ear, guiding me through each second, each sin. A soft breath escaped, sudden, unplaceable, a sound that betrayed the storm inside me. They offered subtle support as I shifted again. My knees moved as I found my place, my breath pausing, caught in the weight of their nearness. Frank stayed behind, one hand on my side, the other close, his touch a lifeline I didn't deserve. I leaned into the silence, my breath slow, the space around me calm, still, but alive with what we weren't saying. They stayed close, keeping me focused without words, their presence a fire I couldn't put out. The moment grew heavier, quiet, unnameable, a moment I wanted to live in forever. I exhaled softly near Frank's cheek as he kissed me, his fingers tracing a strand of my hair while Nick's hand stayed near, steady, silent, a silent promise of more. Everything deepened, subtle but undeniable, a deepening that felt like falling into sin. I stiffened for a moment, like the moment had caught me all at once, like I'd seen the edge and chosen to jump. Then the silence returned, slower, the air thick with pause, thick with what we'd done, what we were. I inhaled, my thoughts stopping for a second. I felt unsteady, my hands reaching for the sheet, the air, anything close, anything to keep me from falling apart. Then I leaned forward, my breath uneven, letting the silence surround me, my fingers finding the sheet's edge, steadying me, holding me in the quiet, in the sin, in the want. I stayed there, held in that silence, held in a moment I knew would ruin me. Imagine you're at the center of something unexpected. How would you handle it? What would you do? Tell me in the comments, I'll read them all. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe, and hit the bell to catch what's next. Thanks for being here.